Let's talk about capital expenditures for self-storage facilities. My name's Mark Helm, and I'm the author of Creating Wealth Through Self-Storage, and I'm the creator of the Quickstart Academy, which houses the training that I offer small investors who want to get in the self-storage business or who want to grow their self-storage business. You can find out more about it at creatingwealththroughselfstorage.com. Perhaps one of the best advantages of investing in the self-storage industry is the fact that there is little capital requirements ongoingly as you own your facility. It's one of the main reasons I was attracted to this asset class. As a property manager, primarily in the office sector, and as a commercial real estate agent, I saw how properties that generated really good net operating incomes had their cash flow decimated by the amount of capital improvements that needed to be spent in any 12-month period. Commissions, tenant improvements, painting units, replacing appliances, replacing toilets, all the things that you hear people complain about. Those are the things that are not involved in self-storage. I've never paid a commission to anyone to rent a self-storage unit out. I've never had to replace a toilet in a unit to rent a unit out. When I really discovered self-storage in the 90s, I fell in love with it because what I saw was a concrete floor and a steel wall with a roll-up door creating apartment-like income without all of the capital expenditures year in and year out to keep that asset up. Yes, self-storage has very limited capital requirements. But you'll notice I said very limited. There are some capital requirements needed ongoingly to keep your facility running. So how do you pay for them? And how much are they? And what are they? Well, let's talk about that. So before we go too deep, let's talk about when we say capital requirement. What is a capital requirement? What is a capital expenditure? So let's go up 50,000 feet and look down first. So when you're buying any business, but we'll take the storage business, what you're doing is you're buying capital items, capital goods that will generate operating income. Doesn't matter what the business or most businesses, it doesn't matter. You could be a car manufacturer. You're buying capital items to generate operating income. Now in the storage business, what are our capital items? Our capital items are our buildings, the concrete the buildings sit on, all the things necessary so that you have a business to rent units out and make income. Now, when we talk about cash-on-cash returns, what we're usually talking about is we're talking about the operating profit, cash flow, the excess operating cash flow after operating expenses, before debt, and before capital expenditures. So a capital expenditure is any amount of money you've got to put out that's not going for the operating expenses. What an operating expense is to generate operating income, you will have operating expenses like paying the utility bill each month, paying the property tax once a year. Employees are an operating expense. Insurance is an operating expense. You've got to pay that in order to be able to continue to generate and collect operating income. So what is a capital expense? Well, a capital expense is any expense you have to pay to keep your capital goods generating that operating income. So, for example, if you are replacing screws in a roof, that's what we do. Twice a year, we'll go around the metal roof system and replace the screws. That is a repair item. That's an operating expense. However, if I took the screws and took that roof panel off and put a new roof on, then the roof is a capital item. That's part of the building. If my air conditioner goes out and I replace it, replacing it is a capital expenditure. And if I'm just fixing an AC or buying air filters for my AC, that is an operating expense. If I'm resurfacing some asphalt, that's a capital expense. If I'm just blacktopping over it, usually that is an operating expense. It used to be pretty easy before you could really take capital expenses and expense them out in year one. So anything that you depreciate over time, that was a capital expense. And anything you expense out the year you did it, usually that was an operating expense. Today, with a lot of capital items, you can expense them out in year one, but they're still capital items. So why do we make this distinction? Well, for a couple reasons. First of all, the net operating income is what determines the value of your asset. Net operating income is income less operating expenses. If you start throwing in your operating expenses, a lot of capital items, that's going to really reduce your net operating income. Now, for year-to-year tax purposes, that might be a good thing. And I'm not that interested in what you pay in taxes from your LLC or the corporation or whatever entity owns it. You can do whatever you want to reduce your tax bill. But if you start throwing in a lot of capital items as operating expenses, you're reducing your net operating income, thus reducing the value of your asset. Especially with me, I've raised money. So I did not want to have my cash-on-cash returns, my excess cash flow over operating expenses gummed down by having to take that operating profit and pay for capital goods. So I started a separate reserve fund for capital items. We're going to talk about how to do that. Now, establishing an appropriate reserve fund for a self-storage facility isn't rocket science, but you got to do some work to do it. So usually what I would do if I was buying an existing self-storage facility, when I did my physical inspection, I would have structural people, I would have HVAC people, I would have engineers who looked at the site and the drainage and the paving, and they would tell me what the expected life of the capital items in that facility are. And then I would research what's it going to cost to replace them. So for example, if we have 5 air conditioners and 3 of them have 5 years life expectancy left on them, and 2 of them have 10 or more years left on them, I'm going to take the 3 I think I'm going to replace, price them out, and then just add inflation to that number, knowing that in year 3 or in year 5, I'm probably going to be replacing those units. So when year 5 comes, I want enough money in a reserve fund to replace those units. Then I would see that it's asphalt. I'm probably going to resurface it once every 5 years. So I would price out resurfacing, and then I would add that. And I would add all the capital items I think I'm going to replace over the life of my hold. And then I would total that number up and divide by, with us, it was 10. We usually organize everything around a 10-year holding period. We might not hold it 10 years. I've never held one 10 years. But I organized my reserve fund around 10 years. And then I would calculate how much do I need to put in each year so that in year 5 I have enough money for the HVAC. In year 6 I have enough money in there to resurface it, etc. The good news is this is self-storage and it's not that difficult. Usually today between 13 cents and 18 cents a square foot per year is a more than adequate reserve fund. But we always do that budget to come up with what that number is. I've never had one more than 18 cents, and I've never had one less than 12 cents. That for us usually equates between $600 and maybe $1,200, $1,300 a month, depending on the size and how old the facility is. Now, if you're building new, you just do the same thing. You count up how many air handlers you have, what's it costing to put the asphalt down, when are you going to need to resurface it. Do the exact same thing and come up with a budget. Now, if you ever get a CMBS loan or insurance loan, they do that. And well, in our last, in fact, in every CMBS loan we've ever had, they manage our reserve fund and they tell us what it is. The last reserve fund I had required us to put 13 cents per year monthly into a reserve fund. They manage it. Then when I had a capital expenditure, I would pay for it and then get reimbursed when I submitted the invoice from that reserve fund. Now here's the thing. For us, having that reserve fund in place, I've never dipped into operating income to pay a capital item. I bought every capital item through the reserve funds that we've set up in place. Now, especially if you have investors, that's really good. Because, for example, we had a $60,000 sign, a real tall sign over an expressway, blow down in a wind event. And when we replaced that $60,000 sign, the day we did it, I paid the deductible for the insurance company out of the reserve fund, and the insurance company paid the rest. Speaking of insurance, we try to have the highest deductible you can have on an insurance policy. Usually, unless it's a really small facility, usually we have a $10,000 deductible per claim on our insurance company. Why? Well, because I have a reserve fund in place. And by having that high deductible, it keeps my insurance costs as low as possible. And if I ever have a claim, the deductible comes out of the reserve fund, and the insurance company usually pays the rest. We've rarely, if ever, made an insurance claim that wasn't fixing a capital item. Now, if possible, we usually fund that reserve fund at closing with 1 year's worth of reserve fund. We don't always, but usually we try to do that. And if we're building new, we typically don't start funding the reserve fund until year 2 or 3, because nothing's happening in year 1 other than construction. In year 2, you're under your builder's warranty in most cases. So most of the time is year 3 is when we start funding that reserve fund. But if we're buying an existing facility or doing an expansion, we usually try to start it off with 1 year's worth of reserve fund in place. And then we sit back and watch it grow. Because here's the thing, there are very few ongoing capital expenses. The ones we do have, we pretty much know when they're going to happen. Why? Because we've done that inspection and we know what the life of most of the capital items in the facility are. And we set a fund up appropriate to replace them when needed. And we never have to dip into operating profit to pay for capital items. That was one of the things that totally attracted me to this asset class. And if you're working with investors, there is no asset class that has the possibility of generating such predictable and steady ongoing cash flow. Tell me any other commercial real estate income producing asset class where you can have a reserve fund as small as 15, 16 cents a square foot and have your capital items covered. They're just not out there. Now you know the secret behind having an asset that generates predictable, distributable cash flow to you, your partners, and your investors. Thank you very much. My name's Mark Helm. I'm the author of Creating Wealth Through Self-Storage, and I'm the creator of the Storage World Analyzer, which is the financial analysis tool we use to analyze self-storage projects and predict their cash flows. If you're using Excel, great, but I invite you to look at the Storage World Analyzer and see if it might help you, especially look at some of the reports that the analyzer produces. You can find out more about it at Creating Wealth Through Self-Storage or StorageWorldAnalyzer.com. So thank you. I look forward to being with you next week, and I'll see you then.